Hello. And here I am, sitting in the kitchen, staring at the message that completely changed the lives of so many people. And when you see a message that says, "Your smile is everything to me," you've got two choices. Ignore it and live in blissful ignorance, or dig deeper. I chose to dig. And what I found something I never thought could happen in our family. It wasn't a simple betrayal. It was something deeper, darker. Something that seeps into your life and leaves a stain you can never truly erase. But I, a former infantryman, managed to turn this situation to my advantage. Oh, I made those officials fall to their knees. Oh, how they begged me. And what I did next. Let's just say, it's the kind of story that could easily be turned into a movie. Looking back, I can't believe how blind I was. The signs were practically screaming at me, but I ignored every single one. It started with the late nights. She'd come home hours after work, claiming she had deadlines or team meetings that ran late. And I believed her because, well, why wouldn't I? She'd never been the type to lie, or so I thought. Then there was her sudden obsession with shopping. Don't get me wrong. I've never been the kind of guy to complain about my wife wanting to look good. But when you're married for over a decade, you notice when your partner changes overnight. The new clothes weren't just everyday wear, they were different, flashy, and not the kind of things she usually wore around me. The same went for the perfume. She'd never been big on fragrances, but suddenly, every day she smelled like a floral department exploded on her. When I asked about it, she laughed it off, saying, "It's just something new I'm trying." And then there was her phone. That was the dead giveaway, even if I didn't realize it at the time. She'd always been casual with her phone. Left it lying around, notifications popping up. But now, it was glued to her hand, and when she did set it down, it was always face down, like it had something to hide. I remember joking once, "What's the deal? Did your boss start texting you love poems or something?" She just rolled her eyes and brushed me off. Still, I ignored it all. Because when you trust someone, you don't go looking for problems. And that's what I did. I trusted her. Hell, I wanted to trust her. After all, this was the woman I married, the mother of our daughter. Why would I ever think she'd betray me? But as they say, hindsight is 20/20. Once I knew the truth, it was all so obvious. The late nights, the new clothes, the perfume, it wasn't for her job. It was for someone else. And that phone? It was a vault of secrets just waiting to be unlocked. Here's the thing, though. I've never been the kind of man to let someone pull one over on me. She thought she was being clever, that her little game was foolproof. But what she didn't realize is that I'm not the guy you lie to. I'm the guy who finds the truth. She thought her little secrets were safe. But she underestimated me. And that was her first mistake. It all started with one message. I wasn't snooping, let me be clear about that. Her phone buzzed while she was in the shower, and the screen lit up just long enough for me to catch a glimpse of the preview. It wasn't long, but it didn't need to be. "Can't wait to see you at the hotel tonight. Room 214. Lily." I froze. My heart stopped, then immediately started pounding in my chest like a drum. I read it again, just to be sure I wasn't imagining things. Lily. Who the hell was Lily? And why were they meeting at a hotel? I told myself to stay calm, to think. I couldn't blow up yet, not without knowing the full story. So I did what any man in my situation would do. I waited. That evening, she left the house with her usual excuses. Another late meeting, another deadline, another lie. I waited 15 minutes, grabbed my keys and followed her. The hotel wasn't far, one of those sleek, upscale places with valet parking and sparkling glass doors. She parked, smoothed her dress, and walked inside. My hands clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't even recognize her anymore. That confident stride, the way she checked her reflection in the glass, it wasn't for me. I gave it a minute, then walked in after her. The receptionist gave me a polite smile, the kind that says, "Welcome, but don't bother me." I glanced around, pretending to look for someone, then leaned on the counter and pulled out my wallet. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Listen, my wife said she was meeting a friend here, but I think I got the time wrong. Can you help me out? I'd hate to miss her. The receptionist hesitated. I'm sorry, sir, but I can't give out guest information. I slid a couple of bills across the counter, keeping my tone friendly. I'm not asking for much, just a name. She glanced around, then sighed, slipping the cash into her pocket. She's meeting someone named Lily. They're here often. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. Lily. There it was again. The name that had started this whole nightmare. Thanks, I said with a fake smile, as if I hadn't just been punched in the gut. That's all I needed. As I walked out, the name echoed in my head. Lily. Lily. I didn't know who she was, but now I had something to work with. I stood in the parking lot for a moment, staring at the hotel doors. Whoever this Lily was, she had no idea who she was dealing with. This wasn't just about catching them in the act anymore. This was about understanding why. Why my wife, the woman I'd built a life with, was doing this. And who this woman was that seemed to be pulling the strings. I didn't know her yet, but now I had a name. And that name, it was the key to everything. I couldn't just leave it at a name. That wasn't enough. I needed proof, something solid, something undeniable. So, I went back to the hotel the next day, dressed sharp and looking like I belonged. Confidence is everything in situations like this. People are less likely to question you if you act like you're in control. At the front desk, I put on my best businessman in a hurry face. I lost my laptop bag here yesterday, I told the clerk, shaking my head as if I were both annoyed and embarrassed. I know this is a long shot, but could we check the cameras? It was a black leather case. The clerk hesitated, but after a little convincing, and another discreet cash offering, he finally led me to the security office. The screen flickered to life as he queued up the footage. "What time were you here?" he asked. "Between 7 and 9 p.m., I said, pretending to think. Of course, I knew exactly when she'd been there. He fast-forwarded through the footage, and there she was, walking through the front doors like she owned the place. My wife, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone. And then there was Lily. The camera caught them in the lobby, meeting like old friends, or maybe something more. They hugged, close and intimate, and I felt my stomach turn. But it wasn't just the way they hugged. It was her face. Lily's face. It nagged at me, this sense of familiarity. Like I'd seen her before but couldn't place where or when. They sat in the lounge, laughing, talking, leaning into each other like they were the only two people in the world. My wife threw her head back at something Lily said, laughing in a way I hadn't seen in years. I just stood there, frozen, staring at the screen. It felt like a bad comedy, one of those ridiculous movies where the husband is the last person to figure it out. Only this wasn't funny. And you know what made it worse? All of this, her happiness, her stolen moments, her laughter. It was happening not in some parallel universe, but in my reality. A reality I paid for. My money was funding their little love story. The hotel, the drinks, even the clothes she wore. The clerk mumbled something about needing to step out for a moment, leaving me alone in the room. I rewound the footage and watched it again, this time focusing on Lily. Her smile, her gestures, her face. Why did she feel so familiar? Couldn't shake it. There was something there, some connection I couldn't see yet. But I'd figure it out. I always did. Now I just needed to find out who Lily really was, and why the sight of her felt like a memory clawing its way back to the surface. I wasn't gonna stop until I knew exactly who Lily was and why she seemed so damn familiar. Lucky for me, I've got a buddy on the police force, Mike. He owes me a few favors, so I gave him a call. I didn't tell him everything, just that I needed a background check on someone. He didn't ask questions, which is one of the reasons I trust him. A day later, I was sitting in a dingy diner, nursing a coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard, when Mike slid into the booth across from me. He dropped a folder on the table and gave me that look. The one cops give when they know what they're about to say isn't going to make you happy. "You sure you want to know this?" he asked. "Just tell me, Mike," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He flipped open the folder. "Her name's Lily Reynolds, 34 years old. Lived in a small town about 2 hours from here. Get this. She disappeared from that town about 10 years ago. 10 years ago. My chest tightened. That was the same time we adopted our daughter. I tried to play it cool, but my voice cracked when I asked, did she leave any reason for disappearing? Mike shrugged. Not officially. No missing persons report, no foul play. Just packed up and left one day. But here's where it gets interesting. He pulled out a photocopy of an old address. This is where she used to live. It's the same town where your daughter's adoption records were filed. For a moment, the world went silent. The clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, the hiss of the coffee machine. It all disappeared. You're kidding, I said, though I knew he wasn't. Mike shook his head. I thought it was a weird coincidence too. But the dates line up. She left town right around the time you adopted your daughter. I sat back in the booth, letting it all sink in. My wife wasn't just cheating on me. She was cheating on me with a woman who was somehow connected to the most important decision we ever made as a couple. The adoption, our daughter. Lily had been in the background of our story this entire time, and I never knew. Oh, I said, letting out a bitter laugh. So life decided to play another joke on me. Huh? This isn't just a betrayal. It's a cosmic punchline. Mike gave me a sympathetic look. What do you want to do with this information? I shook my head. I'm not done yet. I still don't understand how close this woman is to my family. But I will. Because now this wasn't just about an affair. This was about my daughter, my family, and a woman who had somehow wormed her way into both without me even realizing it. I didn't have the full picture yet, but I could feel it. Lily wasn't just some random fling. She was something far more dangerous. I've always been a straightforward man. When something bothers me, I confront it head-on. But this wasn't a time for confrontation. This was a time for patience, for strategy. I couldn't let her know what I'd uncovered. Not yet. So I did what I never thought I'd have to do in my own marriage. I played the part. First, she didn't notice. I stayed polite, kept things casual, and went through the motions of our daily routine. But as the days passed, my responses got shorter, my smiles less frequent. I stopped asking her about her day, stopped leaning in for a kiss when she came home late. And while I wasn't outright hostile, I let the silence grow between us. She noticed. Oh, she noticed. One evening, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. She pushed her plate aside and finally said, "Ethan, you've been so distant lately. What's wrong?" I looked up from my food, taking a moment before answering. "Oh, nothing, darling," I said with a small, detached smile. Just enjoying the silence. It's rare these days, isn't it? Her face twitched, just slightly, like she couldn't decide whether I was joking or accusing her of something. Silence? What silence? You've barely spoken to me all week. I shrugged, stabbing at a piece of chicken. I've just been busy. You know how it is. She leaned forward, her tone softening as she tried to get a read on me. If there's something wrong, you can tell me, Ethan. We've always been honest with each other. I almost laughed at that. Honest? The audacity of her to say that with a straight face was almost impressive. But instead of letting her see my anger, I just smiled again and said, "Of course we have. Don't worry, everything's fine." But it wasn't fine, and she knew it. Over the next few days, her attempts to manipulate me became more obvious. She started being overly affectionate, brushing her hand across my arm when we passed each other in the hallway, kissing me on the cheek out of the blue, calling me honey and darling like she was trying to remind me of the love we were supposed to have. "Do you want to go out this weekend?" she asked one night, curling up next to me on the couch. "Just the two of us. We haven't had a date night in ages."
I glänste her, feigning disinterest.
"Maybe," I said flatly. "Let's see how the week goes." Her smile faltered, just a little, but she quickly recovered. "You're so hard to pin down these days," she said with a laugh, as if she were trying to keep things light. I didn't respond. I just turned back to the TV, letting the silence speak for me. She thought she could charm her way back into my good graces, that she could cover up her guilt with sweet words and fake affection. But I wasn't falling for it. I let her think she was in control, that she still had the upper hand. It was like a cat playing with a mouse, letting it run just far enough before pouncing. She had no idea the trap was already closing around her. When we adopted our daughter, there was an unspoken agreement between my wife and me. Well, maybe it wasn't entirely unspoken. It was something we actually sat down and talked about. We agreed that once the adoption was finalized, we wouldn't go digging into the past. Her biological parents, her origins, none of that mattered. She was ours, and that was the end of the story. We're her family now, my wife had said back then. There's no point in looking back. What's done is done. And I agreed. Why wouldn't I? We were building a life together, giving this little girl a home, a future. What did it matter where she came from? Besides, the adoption agency assured us everything was handled discreetly. They wouldn't reveal the identities of the biological parents, and no one would ever know unless we went looking for it ourselves. For years, it worked. Felt like the past was locked away, forgotten, and irrelevant. That folder sat untouched in our study, buried under other documents, as if it were part of a life we'd left behind. Until now, sitting at my desk, holding the adoption document in my hands, I realized how naive I'd been. The truth wasn't in the past. It had been right here all along, living and breathing in our present. Lily Reynolds, biological mother, the same woman my wife was sneaking off to meet, the same woman who had somehow wormed her way into our lives, was connected to us in a way I could have never imagined. I stared at that name, letting the weight of it sink in. My wife and I had promised not to open this door, not to dredge up the past. We thought it was better that way, cleaner, easier. But here I was, staring at the one thing we swore we'd leave alone, and now there was no turning back. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. We thought no one would ever know. We thought it was all behind us. And yet, somehow, Lily had found her way back into our lives in the worst possible way. I leaned back in my chair, the document still clutched in my hand, and muttered to myself, "You know what's best about family ties? They always come back to ruin your life." The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was cosmic. My wife hadn't just betrayed me. She'd shattered the one thing we swore we'd protect. Our daughter's life, her identity, her innocence. I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. But I wasn't about to throw this at my wife in private. No, this was bigger than her. They needed to face this together, my wife and Lily. They had no idea what was coming. But when they found out, it would hit them harder than they ever expected. Once I had all the pieces of the puzzle, I knew exactly what I had to do. This wasn't going to be some dramatic outburst or a screaming match in the living room. No, that would have been too easy for them. They'd see the truth, but on my terms. The first step was Lily. Using a fake email address and a made-up name, I sent her a message claiming to be a potential investor for her business. Yes, I'd done my research on her. I kept it vague enough to pique her interest and professional enough that she wouldn't suspect anything. I suggested we meet at a nice restaurant, one I knew she couldn't say no to. Sure enough, she responded within hours, eager to set up the meeting. She even threw in a smiley face at the end of her email, as if I didn't already despise her enough. Next came my wife. Our anniversary was coming up, and I knew she'd expect me to ignore it given how distant I'd been acting. Instead, I went the other direction. I bought her a dress. One of those sleek numbers she used to love before she started dressing for someone else, and told her I wanted to take her out for a special dinner. She looked so relieved when I suggested it, like she thought she'd finally won me back. "Really?" she said, her eyes lighting up. "You've been so quiet lately. I thought you didn't care anymore." I forced a smile. "Of course I care. It's our anniversary, isn't it? I even bought flowers. Roses. Bright red." I stood there in the shop, holding the bouquet, and thought about how ironic it was. Roses for a celebration of a marriage that was already dead. When the night came, I made sure everything was perfect. My wife and I arrived early, dressed to the nines, and I played the role of the doting husband. She was glowing, convinced this was her night. Then Lily walked in. She didn't notice us at first. She was scanning the room for her business meeting. When I waved her over, her confusion was obvious. She walked up to the table slowly, her eyes darting between me and my wife, who was already starting to look pale. "Lily," I said, standing up to pull out a chair for her. "Please join us." The color drained from her face as she sat down, her hands trembling slightly as she placed her purse on the table. My wife stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find the words. "Surprise?" I said, raising my glass. "Happy anniversary, darling." The tension at that table was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Neither of them spoke. They just sat there, their faces pale and frozen as I began laying out everything I knew. What happened at that table they would never forget. But this was only the beginning. The restaurant was dimly lit, elegant, and quiet. Exactly the kind of place where people whisper over their meals instead of raising their voices. It was the perfect stage for what I was about to do. My wife was already nervous. She kept glancing at me, her smile faltering every time she caught the cold look in my eyes. Lily, on the other hand, was stiff as a board. She looked like she was ready to bolt out of her chair, but I had them cornered. I leaned back in my seat, taking my time. The silence was almost unbearable for them, and I could feel the tension radiating off both of them. Finally, I placed my glass down and smiled. A smile I'm sure didn't reach my eyes. "So," I began, my tone casual, "since we're all here, I thought it'd be a good time to have an honest conversation. No more secrets." Lily's eyes widened, and my wife stiffened in her chair. "Ethan, what's going on?" my wife asked, her voice shaking slightly. "Oh, I think you know," I said, pulling a folder out of my bag and placing it on the table between us. "But just in case, let me spell it out for you." I opened the folder and began sliding out the evidence, one piece at a time. Photos of the two of them at the hotel. Messages I'd pulled from my wife's phone. The adoption documents with Lily's name clearly listed as our daughter's biological mother. My wife's face turned as white as the tablecloth, and Lily's mouth dropped open as she stared at the papers. "You see," I said, my voice calm but sharp, "I've spent the last few weeks connecting the dots. At first, I thought this was just about infidelity, just a stupid, selfish affair. But then I dug deeper, and imagine my surprise when I found out who you really were, Lily." I turned to my wife. "Do you realize why she wanted so badly to be part of our family? It wasn't just because of you, darling." I tapped the adoption papers. "It's because she already was." My wife's lip quivered. "Ethan, please." "Please what?" I interrupted, my voice rising just enough to make them both flinch. "Please understand? Please forgive? Or are you asking me to ignore the fact that the two of you have not only betrayed me but dragged our daughter into this mess? What exactly are you asking for here?" They were both crying now, tears streaming down their faces as they tried to speak over each other. But I didn't care. Their tears didn't move me. If anything, they just fueled my anger. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You wanted a love story? Well, here you go. This is a plot Hollywood hasn't thought of yet. A wife cheats on her husband with her daughter's biological mother. It's tragic, it's disgusting, and it's so damn ironic I almost can't believe it's real." Lily finally managed to choke out, "I didn't mean for this to happen." "Didn't mean for it to happen?" I snapped. "Then what did you mean, Lily? Showing up in my wife's life, creeping into my family's life, what exactly was your endgame? Or did you even think that far?" They both tried to stammer out apologies, excuses, anything to soften the blow. But I wasn't interested. "This is just the beginning," I said, standing up and looking down at them. "You've destroyed my trust, my marriage, and put our family at risk. But I promise you, this isn't over." I didn't leave the restaurant, not yet. Walking away wasn't enough. They needed to understand what they'd done. Not just to me, but to our family, to our daughter. They needed to feel the weight of their betrayal, to understand that this wasn't something they could just cry their way out of. I stood there at the table, looking down at both of them. My wife was clutching her napkin like it was a lifeline, tears streaming down her face. Lily's hands were trembling, her eyes darting around the room like she was calculating her chances of escape. "No," I said sharply, and they both froze. "You don't get to cry your way out of this. You wanted to play games? Fine. Now we're going to play by my rules." "Ethan, please," my wife whispered, her voice shaking. "Don't do this here. Not in public." I leaned in close, my voice low but deadly. "Why not? You didn't mind meeting her in public, did you? Laughing with her, sneaking off to hotels, humiliating me without a second thought. But now, suddenly, you care about what people might see." Lily tried to interject, her voice cracking. "This is between us." "No," I snapped, cutting her off. "This isn't just between us. You made it about more than us the second you stepped into my family's life. You're not just some mistress, Lily. You're her." I tapped the adoption papers again. "The woman we swore we'd never look for. And now here you are, tearing everything apart." They both sat there, stunned, their mouths opening and closing like fish out of water. The power in that moment was intoxicating, but I wasn't done yet. "If you want me to keep this quiet," I said, my voice steady and cold, "if you want me to protect what's left of your reputations, then you're going to earn it." My wife's eyes widened.
Ethan, no.
"Yes," I said, cutting her off. "Get down. Both of you." Their faces twisted in disbelief, but I didn't budge. "I'm not asking," I said, my tone like ice. "Get down on your knees." They hesitated, glancing at each other, as if silently pleading for the other to step in. But there was no way out. Slowly, shakily, they both slid out of their chairs and knelt on the floor. "Beg," I commanded. "Ethan," my wife started, her voice barely above a whisper. "Louder," I said. "You didn't care about keeping quiet before, so why start now? Beg me not to destroy your lives." Tears poured down their faces as they stammered out apologies and pleas, their voices cracking as they begged for mercy. Heads bowed, shoulders shaking. They looked pathetic. It should have felt satisfying, but all I felt was a cold emptiness. This wasn't justice. It was humiliation. But maybe that's all they deserved. "You want me to keep this quiet?" I asked, stepping back and looking at them, both kneeling on the restaurant floor. "You want me to let you walk away from this without everyone knowing the truth? Fine. But understand this. I own you now. You don't breathe without me knowing. You don't move without my permission. You thought you could play me, but the game's over and I've won." I tossed the adoption papers onto the table, letting them see their betrayal one last time. "Get up," I said, turning to leave. "We're done here." As I walked out of the restaurant, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Their humiliation was complete, and I had nothing left to say. The fallout from that night was as swift as it was brutal. Lily packed up and disappeared within days. Word spread quickly. Someone like her couldn't keep her dirty laundry hidden for long. Small towns thrive on gossip, and by the time she left, her reputation was in tatters. I heard she tried to start over somewhere else, but with her past following her like a shadow, it wasn't going to be easy. The woman who thought she could manipulate her way into my family's life was gone for good. As for my wife, she didn't stay in our house much longer. I made it clear that our marriage was over, and she had no choice but to leave. She moved in with her mother, hoping for support, but even her own blood turned against her. Her mother, a woman who had once praised her for being a good wife, was furious when she learned the truth. I heard they barely spoke after that. My wife had burned every bridge she had, and now she was on her own. And then there was me and my daughter. She was the only part of this mess I truly cared about. I filed for sole custody, and given the circumstances, it wasn't hard to win. My wife didn't even try to fight me on it. She knew she didn't stand a chance. I sat my daughter down one evening, knowing this conversation would be one of the hardest I'd ever have. She was too young to understand all the details, so I kept it simple and honest. "There are some things about your mom and Lily that I can't explain right now," I told her gently. "But what I can tell you is that none of this is your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. and I love you more than anything in the world." She looked at me with those big, innocent eyes and nodded. "I love you too, Daddy." That was all I needed to hear. In the end, the truth had a way of setting everything straight, no matter how painful it was to uncover. My marriage was gone, my trust shattered, but I had what mattered most: my daughter and my integrity. Sometimes life plays the cruelest jokes on us, doesn't it? It throws us into situations we never imagined, breaks us down to our rawest form. But you know what? When the truth comes out, it's always worth the wait. Because in truth, there's freedom. And in freedom, there's the chance to rebuild. Bye-bye.